Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video review, we take a look at the Razer Kishi V2. This is Razer's second gen gamepad controller that has versions for both Android phones and the iPhone. I have to say, I really like products like this, partly because I'm a gamer, but also because using a phone as a gaming machine is very appealing. If you are familiar with the Razer Kishi, or Kishi, depending on how you want to pronounce it, you would remember that the previous version, so this is version 1 right here, it had a stretchy back that was a little flimsier, but also allowed it to be more compact. Razer abandoned that design and went with something totally different. Well, not totally different. There are actually other companies that do this too, but it is more of a sort of a spring-loaded design that in the back, as you can see here, that has the main advantage of being able to accommodate more phones. And that is very much the case with the V2. So the problem I ran into with the first one was that in using a Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, a very tall phone, it actually wouldn't fit on V1. Fits like a glove on V2, and I'm all for that. So when it comes to as far as what phones you're going to fit on this device, you're not really going to run into too many problems. Even if you're using a case in some instances, I'm going to get to that in a second, but in some instances, yeah, you're going to run into some problems with cases, but for the most part, if it's just a naked phone, it's going to fit in very well. Now, the only time that you might run into a problem with a case, maybe not the only time, but because camera bumps are larger now with phones, you're going to run into some issues where the thickness of the case becomes a factor, but not just because of the back, but also because of the bottom. So some cases are thicker at the bottom where the charging port is, and that actually creates a problem for getting the controller to actually fit inside properly. It was an issue I ran into actually using a case with the iPhone 13 Pro, where even though it fit with the case on it as far as the two sides were concerned, it just didn't fit well at the bottom because the case was too thick. Thinner silicone cases seem to be okay, but again, this is a very, it really depends on what you're using, and I can't really tell you which case will fit or which won't. It really comes down to the thickness. Razer slightly redesigned the bases of the controllers. There are 2 new buttons on the shoulders, okay, so you now have 3 shoulder buttons. The layout is pretty much the same as far as where the buttons and the analog sticks and the directional pad are. All those they're situated in the right place. You do have an extra button now that can take you to record your gameplay, or to take you to the Nexus app. I'm going to get to that in a second as well. But this is a slimmer design, at least laterally speaking. So as far as like holding it like this, it is actually slimmer than the V1 was, if that matters. I did like that for that. I just felt it was a little more wieldy this way. But the main thing though is whether or not you're going to like the way the controller feels when you're actually pressing the buttons. And that I feel is a little more subjective, especially if you are familiar with controllers like this. If you're new to the Kishi though, I think you're going to find that the novelty of turning your phone into a gaming device is already going to be pretty appealing. So in that sense, I think experience does play a role here as to how well you're going to take that. Now, I did mention the Nexus app. There is a Razer Kishi app, but that's not the one you want to download. The one you want to download is the Nexus app, and the reason why is because in that app you can modify certain things with the controller, but it also acts as a gateway for you to play games that are compatible with it. These are now for Android or iOS, by the way, so whichever platform you're using, and of course there are controllers for different ones. So we have the iPhone one here, which has the lightning port at the bottom, and then we have the Android one with the USB-C. In both cases, Nexus will present you games in different categories that work with the controller. If you've downloaded games already, even if there are ones that are not on the list, they will show up also as a shortcut at the top that you can so you can just launch the game that way too. So in effect, the app becomes a game launcher as well. That doesn't cover all the games that you can play though, because there are different platforms that you can use to play games too. Xbox Game Pass is one of the main ones that come to mind. GeForce Now from Nvidia also comes to mind as well. The controller, because of its Xbox layout, it just seamlessly works with both of those platforms. So if you launch Game Pass, it already recognizes the controller, and at that point, you're ready to play any game pretty much at that, from there. If you want to remap buttons, Nexus is very limited in what it lets you do with that. You can actually download a different app called Mantis Pro that will let you remap or reconfigure things, especially more so if More so if you find a button is not working. So if for some reason, if a button stops working or the analog stick's not working properly, use Mantis as a way maybe to fix that, as opposed to thinking that the controller's dead. Neither controller has a battery inside, so you're not charging the controller in any way. The port that is on the controller is a pass-through port. So when you plug in the charge there, you are charging the phone through the controller. Unfortunately, now that is convenient because it lets you charge and play at the same time, but the inconvenience is that if you are looking for a fast charge, you're not necessarily going to get that. So if you plug in a fast charger that you're used to charging your phone very, very quickly, unfortunately that pass-through rate is whittled down. So it actually charges the phone at a slower rate than usual. That's at least what I noticed in my testing. So what I recommend is that if you're not playing at all, just charge the phone directly first and then put it in the controller after. So then that way you get more juice in a shorter amount of time and get up and playing again. As of this review, I am still running on the launch firmware. I have not seen any new version come out, so I don't know what Razer plans to do to update anything that the controller does, particularly how it interfaces with the phones that you use or with any of the platforms that are compatible. But I gotta say, at launch, both controllers, whether you're using the iPhone one or you're using the Android one, and it doesn't matter what Android phone you're using, by the way, just as long as it's running Android 9 or later, that doesn't bring into play though whether or not your Android phone can run some of the games that are available or that are compatible. I mentioned Game Pass and NVIDIA GeForce Now earlier, but I'm not even counting the emulators. So if you know how to put an emulator to play retro games from Atari, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and GameCube, N64, all the consoles, basically, if you can think of a console from all the way up to PS2, PlayStation 2, it'll work on this. And it works really, really well too. So I've played retro games, I've played modern games, everything, generally works really, really well in here, assuming that the game actually just runs. Sometimes with emulators, you might run into some issues or other compatibility problems. Not generally really with the controller. As long as you're able to remap the buttons, you're good to go. So for that, I mean, to sum it all up, basically what this controller does is it just turns your phone into a mobile gaming platform that works with a number of different platforms rather than just one. Razer's Nexus app is a gateway to showing you apps or games that will work either from the App Store on iOS or from Google Play on Android. But that's just scratching the surface really, because beyond that, you can pretty much play anything that'll work on this phone. And that's my review of the Razer Kishi V2 for iOS and for Android. For the Best Buy blog, I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.